When you're in an abusive relationship, it can be really hard to recognise it. Your abuser knows exactly what they're doing. They know how to make you feel guilty, how to make you feel like you're overreacting, like it's your fault, like you deserve it. When we talk about domestic abuse or domestic violence, what we're talking about is abuse which occurs within an intimate or family relationship. Plenty of people have taken issue with the term domestic violence because it implies that this violence is different and may be less serious than other forms. Also, the word domestic implies that it can and should be solved within the confines of the home. Marking these issues as being in the private sphere are part of the reason police officers have and continue to be dismissive of this kind of abuse and violence. I'm sure you've heard people to refer to couples rowing as having a domestic, which really trivialises these really serious instances of abuse, assault and violence. Abuse can take several different forms. Physical abuse, which is the kind the media talks about most often and is the easiest to physically see. Physical abuse is physical violence such as hitting, pushing, throwing items at someone, pulling their hair, etc. Emotional abuse is an attack on your mind and your psyche rather than your physical body, although emotional abuse can often lead into physical abuse. Emotional abuse can entail insulting your partner, constantly undermining their self-worth, controlling what a partner wears and how they should look, blaming a partner and a victim for the abuse. This is just as harmful as physical violence and should not be taken lightly or dismissed. Sexual abuse means acts of sexual assault or rape, forcing or coercing you into sex in any way, coercing you into sexual acts you're not comfortable with, or pressuring you into having sex all the time. Lastly, financial abuse, which is often a really powerful factor in preventing victims from being able to leave their abusers. An abusive partner may have total control of the bank accounts, their victims' earnings and money. They may prevent their victims from working or generally limit or try to completely eradicate a person's financial independence. It's really important to talk about how abuse doesn't just mean physical violence. You can be in an abusive relationship without ever being hit. And also, I think it's so important to say, like at the beginning of conversations about abusive relationships, that no matter what your abuser might tell you, it is never, ever your fault. It is 100% completely down to them. The following questions are lifted from refuge.org.uk. All the behaviours mentioned in these questions are abusive behaviours, and if you answer yes to any of these questions, then you may be in an abusive relationship. Are you afraid of your partner? Do you feel isolated? Do they cut you off from your family and friends? Are they jealous and possessive? Do they humiliate or insult you? Do they verbally abuse you? Do they say that you are useless and you couldn't cope without them? Do they physically hurt you? Do they shove, slap, punch or kick you? Have they threatened to hurt you or people close to you? Do they constantly criticise you? Do they have sudden changes of mood which dominate the household? Are they charming one minute and abusive the next, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Do they control your money? Do you change your behaviour to avoid triggering an attack? Are you unsure of your own judgment? Do they damage your possessions? Do they smash up furniture? Do they threaten to harm or kill your pet? Do they threaten to kidnap or get custody of the children? Do they drive fast because they know it scares you? Do they lock you out of the house during arguments? Do they tell you what to wear or how to do your hair? If you did answer yes to any of those questions, then there's a chance that you might be in an abusive relationship. I've got a list of resources in the description bar for this video if you want any further information, support, help, or just someone to talk to. Abuse often happens in cycles. This theory was developed by Lenore Walker, who said that there are 4 stages in the cycle of abuse. Firstly, tension building. This stage is characterised by rising tension, a fear of causing outburst, and a lot of passive-aggressive behaviour. Secondly, acting out, which is when the abusive behaviour will occur. Then there is a honeymoon or reconciliation phase, where the abuser will apologise, assure their partner it will never happen again, that they're sorry, appear to be extremely apologetic and guilty for the fact it happened. They might also coerce their partners into feeling sorry for them with threats of self-harm or suicide if they're not granted forgiveness. Lastly, the calm phase, where the relationship is calm and peaceful before inevitably returning to tension building. This cycle doesn't apply to all abusive relationships, and it probably applies best to relationships where physical abuse is very present, but it is widely accepted as being a useful description of many violent relationships. Contrary to many myths about abuse occurring when a partner snaps or loses control or loses their temper, this is not the case. Abusers choose to be abusive. They don't do it by accident. They know what they're doing. They are 100% completely and utterly and solely responsible for what they do. Whether or not they would consciously term what they're doing as abuse, I don't know, but they do abuse in a conscious effort to gain control and power over their victims, and this abuse is never, ever, ever anyone's fault but the abuser. As helpguide.org says, abusers use a variety of tactics such as dominance, humiliation, isolation, threats, intimidation, denial and blame to exert power over their victims, and they can control their behaviour. Abusers choose who they will abuse, and it's often the people they claim to love. They choose when to act abusively, usually when their victim is alone with them or in a private setting. They can stop their abusive behaviour when they want, like when the police show up. And finally, abusers often intentionally direct physical blows in places on their partner's body that they know it won't be seen. I also just want to say that if your response to an abusive relationship is, well, I would just leave, then you are part of the problem. Victims are often financially dependent on their abusers, physically fucking terrified of them, have children or others dependent on them who they can't leave. They might have a desire to sort of try and keep the family together for the sake of the children, as well as often being very emotionally attached to their abusers. Abusers know how to manipulate people. Their promises of change and the showering of affection in the honeymoon period means leaving isn't as simple as upping and going, because they're very convincing, and victims often have really strong feelings towards this person. You want to believe that this isn't going to happen again. You want to believe that they're sorry. Abusers really know how to get into their victims' heads, and abuse can often completely destroy a person's self-confidence, and it is designed to systematically disempower a victim. Abusers may tell their victims that the abuse is their fault, that they deserve it, that nobody will believe them, that nobody else will ever want them. So what you need to do is not shake your head at a friend and tell them that it's their fault for going back. When the news tells you about one of the 100 women who are killed by abusive partners every year in the UK, don't sigh and say that they shouldn't have gone back, they should have known better. As I've already said, abusers get into their victims' heads and make leaving more complicated and fraught than those who haven't experienced abuse can ever know. Sanctimoniously proclaiming you'd never let anyone treat you like that suggests that victims are weak and somehow to blame for their own abuse. Abuse survivors are anything but weak. These people are stronger than you will ever know. They get dragged to hell and back, and making it through a day can be an unbelievably hard struggle. They fucking do it, and there are no bigger heroes than them for just having the courage to go on. Domestic violence can and does occur across all age groups, ethnicities, genders, sexualities. It happens to all people. Men can be victims as well as perpetrators. The myth of the alpha male that men are tough and strong and therefore can never be victims, especially not victims of weak and puny women, is a really restrictive way of looking at things, and it prevents many men from being able to ask for help and access resources. Women with disabilities are also much more likely to experience abuse and sexual violence, as well as have it completely dismissed. They may also have added complications in trying to escape from abusers, who may be caregivers, and therefore be able to restrict their access to medicines and treatment. Tasks essential to escaping abuse, such as using the telephone, may also become impossible. The reason we're discussing domestic violence at this time is because the Christmas season often sees a spike in calls to the police regarding domestic violence and abuse. For many people, Christmas isn't a holiday, it's a really tense and stressful and terrifying period. Should you need to contact anyone for any type of help or support related to abusive relationships, then I've put several resources in the description bar below, links to charities who run safe houses, shelters, as well as working with outreach teams who can come and visit you in your home at your choosing. Those Pesky Dames are now also on our Christmas break, so we will be rejoining you in January. Have a great new year, and I'm sending you all lots of love.